Welcome to the channel, folks. My name's Shane. In today's video, we're checking out the extremely affordable manual lens from TTARtisan. This is the 50mm f2 prime lens for micro four thirds. This 50mm focal length on my GH5 Mark II gives us the equivalent field of view as a 100mm lens on a full frame camera. At the time of filming this review, this lens is priced at $69 US. 69 bucks. I had no idea what I was in for reviewing a lens at this particular price point, but in retrospect, I'm glad I gave this one a go because it's actually quite good, and I'll explain why throughout this video review. I'll cover everything you need to know in terms of features, handling, image quality, and whether or not this lens is worth it. At the end of the video, I'll also list the pros and cons so you can better decide whether or not this lens is right for your shooting style. All of the sample footage and photos were taken with this TTArtisan 50mm f2 prime lens paired with my Panasonic Lumix GH5 Mark II. While I mostly focus on video, there'll be plenty of sample photos in this review as well. Before we get into it, a massive thank you to Pergear for sending this lens out for the review. I really appreciate it. If you want to check out this lens, I'll link it down in the description. Those links help support the channel at no extra cost to you, so thank you so much. This will be a full pros and cons review, so I hope it's helpful. Let's get into it. Let's take a look at this lens up close because it's built exceptionally well. Everything from the metal housing, high tension focus ring, and clickable aperture ring all feel really great. This is very reminiscent of the Panasonic Leica 15mm f1.7 prime in terms of its design, only on steroids. This comes in at 183 grams without the lens and rear caps, whereas the Panasonic 15mm weighs only 115 grams. This actually feels better in the hand just in terms of its sheer build quality. Since this is a manual lens, the focus ring has hard stops on either side, making it very easy to pull focus consistently in either direction. For video work, I had no issues whatsoever pulling focus on this lens, and given how small it is, this really impressed me. Sometimes with smaller pancake lenses, the focus ring can be a little bit cumbersome, but they really got the feel of this right. We get a minimum focusing distance of 0.5 meters or 50 centimeters. And as you focus with the ring here, you can see the lens just extend slightly, but not too much. As you can see from the back of the lens, there's no contacts or terminals. This lens allows you to set the aperture and focus yourself manually. Learning how to focus manually isn't that complicated, and it will give you the confidence and skill behind the camera that the autofocus only fans are missing out on. For beginners who haven't used a manual lens before, don't stress, you don't have to have the camera in manual mode all of the time. You can simply leave it set to intelligent auto or shutter priority mode, and the camera will take care of the ISO range. All you'll need to do is adjust focus and change the aperture dial, and that's it. So it's pretty simple in that regard. Let's take a look at the aperture ring. So one of the cool things about it is clicked, which means every position clicks into place, and it allows you to know exactly where it's set just by feel. This is all the way wide open at f2, all the way down to f16, letting in the least amount of light. If you like to work with ND filters, we get a 46mm filter thread size on the front, which is pretty standard for a lot of these smaller pancake lenses. Just know this lens has no optical stabilization, but paired with a camera like the GH5, GH6, G85, or the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II or 3, this won't be a problem. For a lens at this price point, I wasn't really expecting to see any lens stabilization, but pair it with a body like this and you won't have any issues. This prime lens can be used in the same way as you might use a standard 50mm equivalent lens like this 25 from Panasonic. You'll have to back up quite a lot further though than with your 25mm lens, but once you get used to the framing, it's a lot of fun to use. You can use this focal range for nature and street photography, portraits, food photography, and anything else that you point at it. I also found this to be a great little video lens with very few trade-offs, again considering the price. For those wondering if you can vlog with this lens, the answer is a clear no. It's just way too close. If you plan on shooting in low light, f2 on micro four thirds is entirely usable. I was able to run my ISO down at 500 to get the shots you see on screen. For this, I exposed the camera in manual mode using the waveforms, and the GH5 Mark II did a really great job. It was really dark and it was raining and the lens performed great. As you can see, you don't have to have the ISO cranked on Micro Four Thirds to get some clean and usable low light performance, even with an f2 lens. When it came to getting background blur and subject separation, f2 on this 50mm lens made the whole process quite easy. Pulling focus in video mode showcases how easy it is to achieve this shallow depth of field. The background blur is smooth and thick, as you can see from these sample clips shot on the GH5 Mark II. Up next, I want to give you the pros and cons of this lens when it comes to sharpness. I shot a series of photos between f2 and f16 on the Aperture Ring, and here are the results. The lens is far sharpest anywhere between f2.8 and f11. The softest pictures, without a doubt, were f2 and f16. f2 and f16 might be too soft to use for regular use, but if you do need a little bit of extra low light performance, f2, it's usable, but f2.8 is clearly sharper. Over to sunstars and flaring. This TTARtisan 50mm 2.0 lens at f16 doesn't produce what I would call very pleasing sunstars. I had some luck with the sun more obscured through the trees, but this also came at the expense of a lot of lens flaring. In these shooting situations, I noticed a lack of colors and contrast, but I can forgive this though, as the lens has a lot of positives, again, given the price. Let's talk about chromatic aberration, or the lack thereof. This is one of the best things about this lens. It doesn't suffer from huge amounts of chromatic aberration. I didn't see a whole lot of problems with any of my test images, even zooming into 400%. There are a couple where I did notice some fringing here and there, especially in extreme contrast situations, but overall, I think the performance of this lens gets the big thumbs up. Let's talk about focus breathing. If you're unfamiliar with this, when you're shooting video, if you rack focus, you don't want to see too much of a zoom effect happen. This lens does suffer from that, and it suffers from it in an extreme way if you're racking focus from minimum all the way to infinity and back. But where I think for regular use, if you're just going to be, say, going between a quarter or 1/3 of a turn through the focal range, I don't think you'll have any problems. But if you do look for it, it's definitely there. And if you plan on doing any type of massive focus pulls, you will notice it. Up next is bokeh. This lens produces what I would consider very pleasing bokeh balls. This effect is straightforward to achieve when using f2 or f2.8. The bokeh looks quite solid for a lens at this price point. Shooting in the minimum focusing distance is the easiest way to achieve this effect. I shot the windscreen of my car at night with some street lights in the background, and the bokeh balls looked great. Let me know what you think of the bokeh balls in the comments below. And lastly, over to vignetting. Like most pancake lenses, there's some vignetting in the corners. This isn't really a problem for video shooters in the 16:9 aspect ratio, but if you're a photographer shooting in the 4:3 aspect, you'll definitely notice some in the corners. These are those black areas that you'll see around the frame. To wrap this video up, I'm gonna cover the pros and cons of this lens, and you can decide whether or not this is right for you. Let's cover the pros first. This is by far the best value, inexpensive prime lens I've ever seen so far. Hands down, at $69 US, it's cheaper for me to buy a lens like this than a spare battery for some of my cameras, which is insane. Secondly, the focus ring, aperture ring, and overall build quality are spectacular. This feels like a far more expensive lens than even some of my Panasonic prime lenses. It feels much better in the hand than the 25mm f1.7. A dedicated 50mm prime for Micro Four Thirds is few and far between. This has a really unique character and look to it, especially for shooting video. The low light performance is solid at f2, even with the reduced sharpness. I was really impressed with the end result. Background blur, subject separation, and bokeh all look really nice on this lens. Chromatic aberration is also really well controlled and not a problem. For a manual focus lens, I've enjoyed this far more than more expensive lenses in the system. The feel of a lens is a total deal breaker or deal maker for me, and this one absolutely delivers. Now let's cover some of the trade-offs. f2 and f16 are way too soft when compared to all the other aperture settings. This prime lens also has some heavy focus breathing for video shooters. This will pose problems for wild focus throws, but for less extreme use, it will definitely do the job. Most pancake lenses like this have vignetting, and this is no exception. Overall, this is the best value prime lens I've seen for Micro Four Thirds. At $69, I can't believe it, 69 bucks. The build quality blows my mind, and I would pick one of these up before the price goes up. Even though this lens does have some trade-offs, this is still definitely worth it, and I highly recommend it. This pancake prime lens is fun to shoot with, and it reminds me of why I love shooting with the compact form factor of Micro Four Thirds. Sure, this lens has some trade-offs, but the positives far outweigh the negatives, especially at $69. It's insane. Thanks again for watching. Catch you soon. See ya.